Good evening. I'm Laurent Rousseau, CEO of SCOR, and I'm very happy to see you tonight. It's for our second edition of the SCOR Live Review, and it's still quite an innovation and quite a rendezvous. As you know, at SCOR, we're all about the science and the art of risk. Tonight, we'll focus on the art. We'll focus on the people. We'll focus on the experience, on the lives. 10 people are going to speak to you today. Many of you are online. Many of you are in the room. And we'll share our experiences across the organization. You will see the SCOR people, the SCOR experts, and a number of guests. Throughout the evening, we will be accompanied by Jean-Philippe Collard-Neven, like last year, at the piano, which really adds a very nice touch. If you remember a year ago, we're still pretty much 18 months into the pandemic. But I think we're full of hope. We're full of perhaps wishful thinking that the pandemic would walk away from our lives, walk away from the day-to-day, and that 2022 would be the opening of the new normal. Little we knew back then. What's happened is clearly the opposite, and with the outbreak of a war 6 months later. Over the same period of time, I have been in the role of CEO of SCOR for 12 months. So at the time, I was literally 2 months in a row. And so this evening, I will take you through how both tracks have gone through, how the environment has completely turned for the worst, and how I have myself evolved for the better. And how, I guess, all of our lives have been experiencing this crisis, this environment, those uncertainties, and how we face an environment where we need to be resilient, we need to make decisions in time of what I would call radical uncertainty. Actually, radical uncertainty is not my term. It's a book from Mervyn King, previous chairman of the Central Bank of England, and really looks at how do we make decisions when all of our structures, all of our mental repairs are being completely lost. If you go back in 2008, the financial crisis came up, and we witnessed what I call a domino effect. What do I mean by that? The whole financial crisis started with subprime mortgages in the US, which triggered a financial crisis, which triggered actually a political crisis. You would all remember the Arab Springs. You would all remember the European Union crisis. And these sovereign crises led to a broader social crisis. What is at stake at the moment is a similar domino effect. And here we have been having the acts of God, Mother Nature, being particularly difficult upon us globally, in the Americas, in Asia-Pacific, in Europe. And we have been going through acts of God of a magnitude that we had not seen for many years, if at all ever. We have been seeing acts of men. What do I mean by that? The pandemic, and how men interact with nature, and how they create their own issues. And this is really where we were a year ago. And since then, we had the act of the devil, war. And war is probably one of the oldest and best known catastrophes to man. Nonetheless, we don't know how to apprehend war. In statistics, which is our business, I guess, we're trying to put names on the situation. What I call this domino effect, is this some kind of a spurious correlation? Is this random? Is it accidental to see Mother Nature, acts of God, acts of men, and acts of the devil all coming together? Or is it what we call a recorrelation in the tail of the distribution? The reinsurance business is all about the tail events, those that are very severe and very rare at the same time, those who escape the laws of large numbers. So how do we name this situation? How do we address the situation that we're facing? And very often, I don't know if you've noticed the same, but when we face a difficult situation, just trying to answer this simple question, what am I facing? What is this all about? And being able to put some words and some clarity in this way is quite useful, I find. So what have we been facing? We've been facing war. We have been facing an outbreak which some might say was a slow motion accident. We saw it coming very slowly, and yet were surprised when it happened. I remember on the 23rd of February, we were having our board meeting to sign off on our full year numbers, full year 2021 numbers. On the 23rd of February, we had a board meeting where, I don't know if you would remember, we knew something was going to happen. And the waiting of a war event is something that is actually very well covered in novels and films, is so what is going to happen? And if you remember, the war broke out on the 24th of February. The atmosphere in the boardroom was extremely serious, extremely concerned. The question was not if, was when and how. And the how could lead to lots of scenarios. Is this Russian situation an introduction to a broader crisis? Very often, crises accelerate pre-existing trends. So this refragmentation of the world, which we have been seeing, countries coming up on themselves, has just been accelerated in a new scale. So the anticipation of the event was there in the boardroom, and the scenarios that us, the management team, were asked to run, to think of, was very large. Now, the next day, the shock happened, 24th of February, in a way that I think everybody was surprised by, at least a number of commentators did not see coming. And here the first reaction that I had, and I think a number of us at SCOR had, was to think of our partners, to think of our people. You think of the people at times of war. So fortunately, we don't have an office in Ukraine, but we have clients, we have trading partners. And some of us, including in this very room, have some dear friends in Ukraine. And so a lot of first calls, first reactions was to care for them. Immediately after that, we're thinking of our Russian colleagues. So we have an office in Moscow. We have 10 people in Moscow. Fortunately, none of them is Ukrainian. But all of them are caring people for their own country, very concerned, and concerned generally speaking. And so looking after these people was, of course, essential. And here you'd be surprised to hear that actually where we have Ukrainian employees is not in the Ukraine, is not in Russia, but it was in the US. And in the US, we had a number of Ukrainian employees who were concerned for their families, who were concerned for their country. And we had to look after them and make sure that they could be heard. I was in the US early March. We had a town hall with the employees. And one of them took the mic and spoke. And I think it's very important to make time to listen. I'll come back to that. The third point facing the event was actually, we were planning our own strategic day end of March. And the question came, what should we do? Should we hold this strategic day? When everything is moving, actually it's not a bad thing to set a direction, to say where we're going. But we had that distinct feeling that what we would want to talk about us, to talk about our business, would not be what our partners, investors would want to talk about, let alone the possibility on end of March, while we have this meeting in this very room, there is a city falling or further development in the war. So we postponed our Investor Day. We accepted, in face of the event, that at some point you have to let go. You have not to force the knowledge, not to force the certainty. And that's really the key question today is, how do you respond in times of a crisis? I think the question of humility is the very first answer, to accept that you don't understand everything, that you cannot apprehend everything. There is a French fable that I like very much. It's from Jean de La Fontaine, called The Oak and the Reed. For the French listeners, c'est le Rousseau et le Rousseau. And here clearly it tells a story about an oak tree, very robust, very solid, having deep roots and facing the wind, standing by a reed which is very small, very nimble. And at the beginning of the crisis, the oak shows how strong he is and how everything is under his control, and how the reed is basically plowing and not resisting the wind. And the oak tree boasts at the beginning, and of course, as the wind gets stronger, the oak gets taken out. And however weak and flexible the reed is, survives. And I think this is a lesson for humility, for patience, for nimbleness, and a good lesson as to how to respond in face of adversity. The second thought that this brings to my mind is, in our business, we talk of risk appetite. What is your risk appetite as an insured? What is your risk appetite as an insurance company? And we all go with an analytical framework, you name it. You all go with numbers, with a quantitative analysis. When in fact, I think that the risk appetite is very often a set of values. The people take decisions based on values much more than on economics. You would expect wealthy people to insure themselves less because they should afford to insure themselves less. The reality is the opposite. The reality is the wealthy people insure themselves more. And the risk appetite is actually not something that is economically rooted. It's a set of values. And so when you see adversity around you, the question is, what is the risk appetite of the people you're dealing with? How do they respond to adversity? And this is something that's really filled me with pride, I would say, and hope, is seeing the SCOR people. And I'm sure in many of your organizations, it's very tempting to let yourself taken down by pessimism, by this fatigue that we have all been going through for 2.5 years now, really. What I see as well at the same time in the SCOR organization is people standing up, pushing, fighting, relentless energy. And that, I think, is often overlooked, is often underestimated. But when you look back past 24 months, we have been going through tremendous times, and we should not underestimate the resilience of our people. Now, let me finish on decision-making, and here reflect a little bit on myself as CEO of a large organization, standing for our business, for our people, for our clients, for our partners, for society, having to beat the drum, to hold the flag every day, being in good mood, crack a joke, even when you don't want. And this physical energy is, for me, something that is essential. Is how do we show the way, again, with humility, but with energy and strong convictions. How do you listen? How do you listen to people? It's something as well that is a huge trap in my role is when I speak, people stop talking and they listen, and it should be the other way around as well. And that for me is essential, back to what I was saying, is how do you listen to the white noise? How do you listen to the small voices? How do you listen to the various feelings and views of the people? And then clearly the role of a CEO is to reduce the uncertainties. When we plan, when we prepare a strategic plan, it's not to predict, it's not to set one course of action, it's to reduce uncertainties. And this, I think, is a good way to frame decision-making. Decision-making is about trade-off. Decision-making is about making the least people unhappy, is to find a way that is manageable and to bring simplicity and stability when everything is moving around. I will conclude on this. This kind of crisis is always a good moment to look back, to know from history what we saw, what we've learned. I think with the acceleration of change, with the acceleration of the world, we have to accept that the informational value of the past is decreasing. Look at the past, learn from it, but most importantly, draw scenarios. Let your imagination go. Look forward. This is what we're going to do today, and I hope you will enjoy it. Thank you.